Beneath the moon's unyielding gaze, a single tear froze into ink upon the snow, whispering secrets the wind dared not carry. Alara's breath emerged in fragile plumes, suspended in the merciless chill of the northern mountains, where the air itself seemed to conspire against the living. The pack's howls receded like a fading curse, swallowed by the vast, indifferent white that stretched endlessly before her. It had begun at the break of dawn, in the heart of the Alpha's great hall, where the air hung heavy with the scent of pine smoke and unyielding authority. Her Omega nature, once cherished in whispers as a gentle counterpoint to the pack's ferocity, had been declared a liability, a soft thread in the iron weave of their hierarchy. The Alpha, his eyes cold as forged steel, had seized the silver thread from around her neck, that sacred relic woven from lunar silk and blessed by the Deuce's own hand. With a single, deliberate snap, he severed it, proclaiming her unworthy of the mate bond that every soul in the pack yearned to claim. The rejection was not merely words, it was a ritual of expulsion, etched into her flesh with the shallow claws of the enforcers. Gashes bloomed across her arms and shoulders, superficial yet stinging like accusations, designed to mark her as forsaken without granting the mercy of death. Now, as she staggered forward through the deepening snow, each step a laborious defiance against the wind's relentless assault, the pain throbbed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The world narrowed to essentials. The crunch of ice beneath her worn boots, the bite of frost nipping at her exposed skin, and the metallic tang of her own blood seeping from the wounds. She clutched the frayed ends of the silver thread in her fist, its once lustrous strands now dull and bloodied, a talisman of her shattered destiny that drew fresh crimson from her palm. In the fading light of the sun, obscured by roiling storm clouds that promised unrelenting night, Alara sought refuge against a jagged outcrop of rock, its surface as unforgiving as the pack's verdict. Exhaustion claimed her, blurring her vision with a haze of tears she refused to shed lest they freeze upon her lashes like additional chains. The moon, ever the vigilant sentinel, rose prematurely on the horizon, its pallid luminescence casting long shadows across the frozen tundra, illuminating the landscape as if rendering judgment upon her solitude. She had long sensed a latent power within herself, dismissed by the pack as the fleeting whims of an Omega's intuition, a mere echo of the Deuce's grace, too subtle for warriors to value. But here, in the raw isolation of exile, it stirred like embers buried beneath layers of ash, whispering of paths unseen and truths yet to unfold. The wind howled through the pines, carrying fragmented scents of resin and distant blood, intertwining with the sharp, coppery aroma of her injuries. Alara pressed her bloodied hand to the snow, watching as the red liquid seeped into the pristine white, forming intricate veins that resembled ancient runes etched by some forgotten hand. What was strength, she pondered in the quiet recesses of her mind, if not the quiet endurance of silence after the storm's fury? As darkness fully enveloped the mountains, she curled into a tight ball against the rock, the cold infiltrating her bones like an insidious poison. She wondered, in that vulnerable hush, whether the Deusa would summon her spirit before the prowling wolves could claim her body, or if this exile was merely the prelude to a deeper trial. The silver thread, warm against her chilled skin despite its ruin, seemed to pulse faintly, a silent companion in the encroaching void. The storm erupted with primal fury, as if the mountains themselves rebelled against the intruders, flinging snow like lethal shards of fractured crystal across the narrow ravine. Alara jolted from her uneasy slumber, her heightened senses piercing the chaos, not merely the gale's roar, but the erratic cadence of labored breaths reverberating from the encroaching shadows. Rising unsteadily, her heart thundering like distant war drums, she drew her tattered cloak tighter around her frame, the fabric whipping wildly in the tempest. There, partially entombed in a towering snowdrift, sprawled a colossal figure swathed in dark furs sodden with blood, his expansive chest rising and falling in desperate heaves, as though the very earth sought to crush him beneath its weight. He was no mere traveler lost to the wilds. The potent aura of alpha dominance enveloped him, laced with the acrid sting of iron and a profound undercurrent of regret that clawed at Alara's instincts. This was King Thorn, sovereign of the shadowed domains that lay beyond the jagged peaks, a ruler who had abandoned his throne in a desperate flight from assassins dispatched by a treacherous rival pack. His form bore the brutal testimony of betrayal, a fresh laceration across his throat, hastily bound yet oozing dark rivulets, and a tapestry of older scars that narrated tales of victories hard won at exorbitant prices. Guilt shadowed his piercing eyes, golden irises flecked with the gray of gathering storms, as he lifted his head and locked gazes with her. An instantaneous, visceral connection ignited between them, a primal acknowledgement that twisted through Alara's core, blending terror with an insidious curiosity she could not quell. She remained rooted in place, her fingers instinctively seeking the frayed silver thread now serving as a crude bandage against her neck, its lunar weave a fragile anchor to her lost identity. Thorn was profoundly broken, his formerly imperious stature eroded by the curse of his history, a cherished mate sacrificed to the altar of his unbridled ambition, a realm now fracturing under the specter of interminable conflict. "Flee from me," he growled, his voice a rough scrape like stones grinding in the wind. Yet his gaze contradicted the command, ensnaring hers with a raw hunger forged in the fires of profound isolation. By all rights, she should have bolted into the storm. Omegas were not meant to entangle themselves with deposed alphas, lest they invite further ruin. Yet the moon observed from its celestial throne, its ethereal light pooling around their forms like spilled mercury. And in that spectral illumination, Alara discerned not a beast to fear, but a reflection of her own profound exile, a soul adrift in the same merciless wilderness. The wind intensified its assault, bearing the faint, ominous snarls of his pursuers on its icy breath. Thorn attempted to rise, his massive hand splaying against the snow, imprinting it with a crimson-stained outline of his desperation. Ilara's curiosity clashed violently with her ingrained fear. What affliction could humble a king to such depths? Compelled by an unseen force, she advanced, the frigid air thickening with the overwhelming scent of his anguish, a cocktail of sweat, blood, and the faint, underlying musk of untamed power. In that precarious instant, the silver thread cradled in her grasp warmed inexplicably, as if infused with a latent life, drawing her inexorably toward the enigma before her. They lurched through the blinding blizzard toward the yawning entrance of a concealed cave, its crystalline walls shimmering like the arteries of some primordial leviathan awakened from slumber. Alara bore much of Thorn's immense weight, her lithe body quivering under the strain, their exhalations intertwining in the narrow confines, hers rapid and laced with caution, his deep and ragged, echoing off the stone like suppressed thunder. The cavern provided meager sanctuary, yet it sufficed, a modest fire kindled from scavenged dry tinder, and brittle branches flickered to life, its warm glow etching dramatic shadows that writhed across the uneven surfaces like restless apparitions. Beyond the threshold, the tempest bellowed, smothering the guttural howls of the hostile pack that stalked the king, intent on extinguishing his bloodline and seizing his dominion. As the flames hissed and popped, a tentative empathy unfurled within Alara's heart, delicate as the first thaw after eternal winter. She ministered to his injuries with meticulous care, shredding lengths from her already ragged cloak to fashion bandages, her fingertips grazing the feverish heat of his flesh and sensing the subtle tremors of his ironclad self-control. Thorn observed her in silence, his guilt manifesting as an almost tangible shroud. He had spurned potential mates in the past, judging them inadequate for the crushing responsibilities of the crown. And now destiny taunted him with this Omega's unassuming resilience. "You imperil your very existence for one you do not know," he murmured, the timbre of his voice mellowing as the fire's radiance began to dissolve the frost that separated them. The bond evolved beyond base instinct, becoming a silken filament that threaded through their mutual quietude, her banishment echoing his evasion, her innate tenderness breaching the fortifications of his weary soul. The frayed silver thread, now loosely coiled around her wrist like a bracelet of fate, captured the fire's dancing light, its lunar filaments throbbing subtly as though synchronized with their burgeoning proximity. They exchanged words in halting fragments, voices low against the storm's symphony, tales of packs rent asunder by envy and ambition, of decisions that scarred the spirit more enduringly than any talon. Vulnerability seeped into the air like mist. Ilara bared the acute agony of her expulsion, the way it had hollowed her from within, while Thorn divulged the malediction of his sovereignty, a existence dominated by obligation that had exacted love as its steepest toll. As the hours stretched into the velvet embrace of night, the adversary's cries diminished to faint echoes, but the genuine haven lay in this nascent alliance, hammered in the crucible of firelight and obscurity. The moon intruded through a narrow fissure in the rock, bestowing its benediction upon their interlude, and beneath its serene vigil, Ilara perceived the nascent stirrings of a force both sacred and irrevocable, the silver thread humming like a distant lullaby. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. Dawn infiltrated the cave with the timidity of a supplicant, suffusing the icy walls with strokes of muted gold that evoked the tentative promise of renewal. Ilara stirred to consciousness under Thorn's unwavering scrutiny, the Alpha's lacerations swathed, but his essence still cloaked in lingering shadows of doubt. Compelled by the need for escape, they delved further into the labyrinthine depths of the cavern, navigating its serpentine corridors where the atmosphere thickened with an arcane resonance, as if the stone itself harbored ancient whispers. The frayed silver thread encircling her wrist ignited with an insistent heat, inexorably guiding her to a secluded alcove where moonlight, defying the diurnal hour, gathered in a luminous basin resembling molten silver poured by divine hands. In that sanctified space, her concealed endowment erupted into being, the Pathfinder's vision, an exceptional omega faculty to perceive the intricate tapestries of destiny spun by the Deuce's loom. Torrents of foresight cascaded through her mind's eye, vignettes of Thorn's bygone treacheries, the perfidy of the rival Alpha that had inflicted a generational curse of ceaseless strife upon his lineage, and a prospective tapestry wherein her intervention could disentangle the knots of doom. She convulsed, crumpling to her knees upon the chilled stone, the thread radiating brilliance as crystalline tears carved trails down her cheeks, solidifying into iridescent droplets that pattered against the floor like sacred offerings. Thorn descended beside her, his robust hand anchoring her quaking form, enlightenment blooming across his features like the moon's ascent. "You are the linchpin," he breathed, reverence entwining with trepidation in his tone. She transcended the role of mere outcast. She embodied the predestined counterpart, her tears serving as the prophetic script. This epiphany wove them into an even more profound tapestry, the cavern's reverberations magnifying the synchronized cadence of their pulses. Ilara beheld his culpability exposed in stark relief, the consort he had discarded in pursuit of dominion, now mirrored hauntingly in her own repudiation. The moon's radiance amplified, ethereal emblems materializing in the ether, wolves encircling a throne forged of glacial purity. True fortitude, she comprehended amid the deluge, resided not in conquests seized through might, but in mercies elected from the soul's depths. As they emerged into the crystalline daylight veiling the slopes, the thread throbbed akin to a vital organ, designating her as the harbinger of redemption he had neither anticipated nor merited, its silver gleam a beacon against the encroaching perils. The serpentine mountain pass constricted into a treacherous corridor of sheer, ice-glazed precipices, where the rival pack materialized from the gloom like vengeful wraiths beneath a firmament marred by brooding tempests. Thorn underwent the shift with primal urgency, his alpha silhouette dissolving into a maelstrom of sable fur and lethal fangs, shielding Ilara with a savagery ignited by emergent resolve. Yet the pivotal clash transcended physical violence, manifesting in a torrent of accusations. The antagonist Alpha, his hide etched with battle trophies, unveiled the king's archival transgressions, pacts sundered for expediency, Omegas discarded like chaff to consolidate alliances. You spurn what eludes your dominion, the foe snarled, his optics ablaze with venomous intent, the words slicing deeper than any blade. Alara positioned herself at the melee's epicenter, the silver thread searing her epidermis as her pathfinder acuity cleaved through the tumult. She envisioned the ethical impasse with crystalline clarity. Absolve Thorn of his remorse-laden chronicle, or abscond toward her solitary emancipation, abandoning him to the abyss of conflict. Crimson marred the snowscape, thorns from a novel incision rending his flank, hers from a peripheral strike that grazed her side, converging in rivulets that evoked a covenant inscribed in vital fluid. The aggressors encircled them, their forms a wall of snarling menace. But Alara's utterance pierced the cacophony, her endowment erupting as a radiant aegis that compelled a momentary stasis. Authority devoid of empathy forges shackles for all, she proclaimed, her declaration a maxim sculpted by the zephyrs, resonating with the philosophical weight of ages. Thorn confronted his reckoning, descending to one knee in supplication before her, the encumbrance of his diadem more oppressive than any forged weapon. The deliberation loomed immense, the delicate filament of affection or the illusory liberty of isolation. As the adversaries withdrew into the swirling fog, their howls a chorus of frustrated retreat, Alara proffered her palm, saline droplets crystallizing upon her eyelids like frozen resolve. The moon presided from its empyrean perch, its luminescence an impartial adjudicator, as they elected. Not the clamor of warfare, but the hazardous odyssey toward absolution, the silver thread binding their choices in luminous testimony. I've rewritten chapters 6 through 9 with significantly more details to extend their length, focusing on deeper sensory immersion, extended introspections, elaborated action sequences, and richer exploration of moral dilemmas and symbolic elements. The silver thread remains the central recurring symbol, its presence woven more intricately into emotional beats. This maintains the poetic, cinematic tone while amplifying the epic scope, without altering the overall structure, CTAs, or arc. The first 5 chapters remain as previously provided. They pressed deeper into the frozen core of the highlands, where the air grew dense and crystalline, laden with the evocative, almost tangible bouquet of ancient conifers whose branches sagged under the weight of perpetual ice, and the subtle, insidious undercurrents of unvoiced apprehensions that seemed to seep from the very ground. Each step echoed with a muffled crunch, the snow yielding reluctantly beneath their boots, as if the earth itself resisted their passage into this realm of unforgiving solitude. Thorn's remorse festered like an unstaunched lesion deep within his chest, a constant throb that mirrored the rhythmic pulse of the silver thread now coiled around Alara's wrist, its frayed edges occasionally catching on the rough fabric of her cloak and drawing faint, symbolic pricks of blood. The apparitions conjured by Alara's Pathfinder endowment haunted him relentlessly. Spectral visions of the consort he had once rebuffed in a haze of unbridled ambition, her form dissolving into mist under a blood-red moon, now manifesting as a persistent entity, exacting reparation through his every waking moment and fevered dream. The journey wound through narrow defiles where the wind carved invisible sculptures from the rock faces, whistling mournfully like the ghosts of fallen warriors. Alara felt the weight of Thorn's silence pressing upon her, heavier than the pack on her back, and she stole glances at him, his broad shoulders hunched against the gale, his golden eyes distant, reflecting the storm's turmoil. She longed to reach out, to let her fingers trace the scars visible even through his fur-lined cloak, but restraint held her back. Their connection, though deepening, was still a fragile thing, easily shattered by the chill of doubt. As the sun dipped low, painting the snow in hues of bruised purple and fading gold, they stumbled upon the ruins of a dilapidated temple of frost, its vaulted spans rising like the skeletal remains of some long-forgotten deity. The structure was a marvel of ancient craftsmanship, incised with celestial inscriptions, runes of the Dusa that depicted wolves howling at lunar cycles, their lines glowing faintly with an inner luminescence that resonated in perfect harmony with the silver thread, as if the edifice itself acknowledged their intrusion and welcomed them into its sacred decay. Within those hallowed confines, sheltered from the blizzard's fury by walls that hummed with latent power, their affinity intensified through protracted interludes of quietude that stretched like the long northern nights. Alara kindled a small fire, using damp tinder and the last of their flint, the flames leaping to life with a crackle that filled the chamber, casting elongated shadows that danced across the rune-etched stones like living entities. She sat close to Thorn, her hands tending to the fresh abrasions on his arms from their earlier scramble over icy ledges, her touch light yet deliberate, each brush of her fingers alleviating the Alpha's afflictions not just physically but spiritually, her innate compassion acting as a soothing salve against his pervasive melancholy, which clung to him like the frost on the temple's arches. The scent of burning pine mingled with the earthy musk of their shared warmth, creating an intimate cocoon amid the desolation. Nevertheless, skepticism insinuated itself like creeping frost along the edges of their bond. Thorn dissected their liaison in the quiet hours, rationalizing it as a transient exigency of endurance, a mere alliance forged by the storm's necessity rather than the Deusa's decree. He paced the chamber's perimeter, his boots scraping softly against the frozen floor, his mind a whirlwind of ethical quandaries. Could he, a king marked by the blood of past choices, truly deserve this Omega's light? Alara mirrored his inner turmoil, the dread of reiterated repudiation coiling in her Omega spirit like a serpent, fortified by the cicatrices of banishment that still ached with phantom pain. She clutched the silver thread tighter, feeling its warmth pulse against her skin, a reminder that her exile had not stripped her of purpose, but perhaps prepared her for it. As obscurity descended fully, blanketing the temple in a velvet hush broken only by the distant drip of melting ice, a premonition gripped her with sudden violence. The antagonistic horde converging from the shadowed valleys below, lured inexorably by the sanguine spoor of the king's wounds, their howls rising like a tide of inevitable doom. In the temple's spectral luminescence, where shafts of moonlight pierced the cracked ceiling like divine fingers, Thorn finally unburdened his profoundest ignominy. He knelt before the central altar, a slab of translucent ice veined with silver, and spoke in a voice raw with the weight of years, the voracious aspiration that had consigned his inaugural love to oblivion, her rejection a calculated move to secure alliances that now crumbled like the temple's stones. Ilara, seated on a fallen pillar, disclosed her own concealed trepidation in return, her words flowing like a confessional river. The potency of her gift that had estranged her from the communal embrace of the pack, marking her as an anomaly to be feared rather than cherished. Tears welled in her eyes, freezing midway down her cheeks into delicate crystals that caught the firelight, and she extended the silver thread toward him, letting it drape across his palm. The thread blazed with augmented fervor, its lunar weave illuminating the runes around them, emblematic of their interlaced dooms and the fragile bridge between guilt and forgiveness. The gales outside conveyed ululations of imminent perdition, growing louder with each passing minute, the sound reverberating through the stone like the heartbeat of an approaching beast. Yet in that pivotal juncture, as the fire dimmed to embers, fragility tempered their pact into something unbreakable. "Mercy," Ilara intoned softly, her voice a thread of light in the gathering dark, "anoints even the prostrate, turning wounds into wisdom." Thorn inclined his head slowly, acquiescence dawning akin to the moon's nocturnal ascension, his hand closing over hers around the silver thread, weaving their reluctances into a reluctant yet profound unity. The temple seemed to sigh in approval, its runes pulsing once more as they prepared for the storm not just outside, but within. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The temple's inviolability fractured abruptly as the belligerent legions violated the perimeter wards, their silhouettes emerging as menacing phantoms against the blizzard's opaque shroud, eyes gleaming with feral hunger in the moonlight, the air filled with the acrid scent of wet fur and drawn steel, the first snarls echoing off the icy walls like cracks in a frozen lake. Thorn engaged with revitalized wrath, his body shifting seamlessly into alpha form, a towering mass of sable muscle and lethal intent, his maneuvers unfolding as a balletic fusion of tempered steel from his concealed dagger and rending claws that tore through the intruder's ranks. He moved with the grace of a predator honed by countless battles, dodging lunges and countering with strikes that sent foes sprawling into the snow, their blood steaming briefly before freezing into dark blooms. Yet the multitude threatened to engulf him in their relentless tide, waves of attackers pressing forward with coordinated ferocity, their howls a cacophony that drowned out the wind. Alara, positioned at the temple's inner threshold, felt her heart race in tandem with the chaos, the silver thread searing her wrist like a brand of destiny. Her Pathfinder endowment crested to a fever pitch, visions flashing in rapid succession, hidden conduits snaking through the temple's underbelly, passages carved by ancient priests to evade precisely such sieges. She guided them with urgent whispers and gestures, pulling Thorn back through a narrow archway, just as a rival's axe embedded in the stone where his head had been moments before. But the deliverance exacted a grievous levy, far beyond the physical strains of flight. A divination seized her mind with crystalline inevitability, mandating an oblation of profound personal cost. To ameliorate Thorn's deep-seated malediction, the curse of endless war woven into his bloodline by his past betrayals, she was compelled to tender her life's essence, tethering her vitality irrevocably to his remorse-laden anima, in a ritual as ancient as the Deusa herself. They retreated into a sanctum at the temple's heart, a chamber illuminated by perennial pyres that burned without fuel or smoke, their flames eternal blue tongues licking at the air, casting an otherworldly glow that made the silver thread shimmer like liquid moonlight. The walls here were adorned with murals of lunar sacrifices, omegas offering blood under full moons to heal alpha kings, faded yet potent symbols that seemed to watch their every move. Alara's breaths came in shallow gasps, the weight of the vision pressing upon her like the mountain stone, but resolve hardened in her eyes as she approached the central altar, a monolithic slab hewn from immutable ice, its surface etched with channels designed to carry sacrificial fluid. With trembling yet deliberate hands, she unwound the silver thread from her wrist, its frayed ends now symbolizing the fractures in their shared fates, and interlaced it with a deliberate prick from her own claw, drawing forth a droplet of her vital fluid that welled bright and true. The thread transfixed her palm in a deliberate pierce, scarlet coursing in steady rivulets onto the altar's waiting grooves, the liquid tracing glowing paths that ignited the runes beneath. Agony surged through her conduits like wildfire, raw and unfiltered, radiating from her hand to her core, the fairest bouquet permeating the enclosure and mingling with the pyre's ozone scent, creating an atmosphere thick with the gravity of transformation. Her vision blurred, the world narrowing to the pulse of her blood feeding the ritual, each drop a relinquishment of her isolation, binding her essence to Thorn's guilt in a visceral exchange. The moon's effulgence, filtering through a high oculus in the ceiling, magnified exponentially, interlacing their trajectories in a cosmic embroidery of light and shadow. The silver thread now thrumming with combined power, its weave mending before their eyes as if alive. Thorn, having dispatched the immediate pursuers at the sanctum's entrance with a final, desperate roar that shook the foundations, ensnared her collapsing form in his arms, his gaze distended with a maelstrom of dismay, reverence, and dawning understanding. "What folly have you wrought upon yourself?" he exhaled, his voice breaking like ice under pressure, the warmth of his body a stark contrast to the chill seeping from her paling skin. Yet in her steadfast regard, as she fought to remain conscious amid the ebbing pain, he discerned the verity, affection as validation and proof, not some unearned laurel or fleeting reward. The ritual's energy coursed through him then, a cleansing wave that unraveled the curse's tendrils from his soul, granting perspicacity where only shadows had dwelled. His antecedent, no longer a fetter binding him to cycles of violence, but a didactic forge tempering empathy from the fires of regret. The antagonist's baying resounded nearer from the outer chambers, their treads pulverizing the snow-dusted floors like fracturing osseous structures, the temple trembling under the assault. Ilara, weakened yet invigorated by the bond's completion, rose with Thorn's aid, the silver thread now a vibrant loop connecting their wrists, pulsating as a lodestar guiding them forward. They absconded into the maelstrom through the hidden passages her vision had revealed, dark, echoing tunnels lined with dripping stalactites that whispered encouragements from the Deusa, her sanguine contribution, the indelible script of their collective resurgence. Fortitude, in that harrowing flight, manifested not in unyielding strength, but in electing clemency amidst conflagration and ichor. The winds lament outside a dirge for the unrepentant foes they left behind. The threads glow a promise of trials yet to come. Upon the precipice of an expansive glacial expanse that stretched like a vast undulating sea of white under the star-pricked sky, beneath a moon distended with celestial potency, its surface scarred with craters that mirrored the wounds of the world, the climactic altercation transpired with the inevitability of a prophecy fulfilled. The rival Alpha, a hulking brute whose fur was streaked with the gray of premature age and eyes burned with the red of unquenched vendetta, charged from the tree line with unbridled malice, his pack fanning out in a semicircle that hemmed them against the sheer drop. The air crackled with tension, the wind whipping up flurries that stung like needles, carrying the mingled scents of fear sweat, fresh blood from earlier skirmishes, and the metallic tang of drawn weapons. Thorn, emancipated from the remorse's suffocating yoke by Alara's sacrifice, countered with principled determination that transformed his every action, not insensate fury born of desperation, but precision honed by her subtle guidance and the ethical clarity now infusing his veins. He shifted partially, retaining his humanoid form for strategic grace, while his claws extended like obsidian blades, meeting the rival's initial lunge with a parry that sent shockwaves through the ice. The skirmish unfolded with visceral intensity across the frozen plain, vital fluid arcing in parabolic sprays from gashes inflicted and received, configuring motifs reminiscent of lunar ideograms etched in crimson against the pristine white, the zephyrs lashing their vestments and pelage into frenzied tempests that blurred the lines between man and beast. Thorn dodged a sweeping claw that cratered the ground, retaliating with a strike to the rival's flank that drew a guttural howl, the sound echoing across the expanse like a thunderclap. Alara, though drained from the ritual, stood her ground at the fray's edge, her Pathfinder endowment augmented exponentially by their bond, divinations unfolding in her mind like a tactical map. Visions of the rival's weak points, the terrain's hidden fissures, and the precise moments to intervene. She wove through the chaos with ethereal poise, her voice cutting through the snarls to direct Thorn. A whispered warning of an ambush from the left, a guiding hand that steadied his stance as he pivoted to fell two attackers in a single sweeping arc. The silver thread, now a consummate annulus encircling their conjoined grasp, even in the heat of battle, served as both talisman and conduit, its glow intensifying with each shared heartbeat, channeling her visions into his reflexes. One particularly brutal exchange saw the rival Alpha pinning Thorn against a wind-carved ice spire, fangs bared in a snarl that revealed yellowed teeth, but Alara's insight revealed the foe's overextension. She hurled a loose shard of ice like a projectile, distracting him long enough for Thorn to reverse the hold and deliver a crushing blow to the throat. The battle raged for what felt like eternities compressed into minutes, the moon's light shifting shadows that played tricks on the eye, until the rivals' forces began to falter, their howls turning to whimpers of retreat. As the adversary succumbed at last, vanquished yet accorded quarter, in a moment of profound choice, Thorn's claw halting inches from the killing strike, honoring the mercy Alara had taught him. The Alpha pivoted toward her amid the settling snow, his chest heaving, blood trickling from a shallow gash on his brow. The amalgamation that followed eschewed idyllic rapture or hurried passion, constituting instead a conquest arduously attained through layers of resistance and revelation. His somber disposition, once a fortress of melancholy, capitulating gradually to her subdued potency, allowing vulnerability to seep in like the first melt of spring. Her ostracism, long a shadow of isolation, discovering telos and belonging in his reclamation, the silver thread bridging the chasm between their wounded souls. They collapsed together onto the blood-flecked snow, breaths ragged and sinking like synchronized cardiac rhythms beneath the astral canopy, the gelid breeze vivified by the aromas of conifer sap from distant woods, and the nascent potentiality of a future unmarred by curse. The moon deluged them in argent splendor, its rays filtering through dispersing clouds to bathe their forms, archetypes of the Diusa, wolves entwined under lunar halos, threads of fate mending, ratifying their covenant with subtle shimmers in the air. No longer the fractured monarch adrift in guilt's sea and the derelict Omega forged in rejection's fire, but confederates in a trajectory autonomously embraced, their hands clasped around the thread as they rose, surveying the fallen foes with eyes tempered by compassion rather than triumph. The gales tempered to a gentle whisper, dispersing the vestiges of discord like scattered ash, bequeathing solely the covenant of convalescence and the quiet strength to rebuild. In that union, forged in blood and moonlight, Elara felt the Diusa's approval hum through the thread, a spiritual affirmation that love, resisted and rationalized, had at last been accepted as the ultimate redemption. Within the umbra of the glacial bastion that had erstwhile epitomized Thorn's forsaken regality, a towering edifice of pale blue ice and ancient stone perched atop the highest peak, its spires piercing the sky like frozen spears. They re-emerged as transfigured entities, no longer shadows of their former selves, but beacons of hard-won renewal. The journey back had been arduous, traversing treacherous passes where avalanches threatened and the wind clawed at their cloaks. But the silver thread guided them unerringly, its mended weave now a vibrant cord pulsing with shared vitality, illuminating hidden paths and warding off lesser threats with its lunar glow. As they approached the bastion's gates, flanked by vigilant sentinels whose eyes widened in recognition, the pack within sensed the transmutation in their aura, a shift from the king's solitary tyranny to a harmonious light that emanated ethical radiance, compelling loyalty not through fear or decree, but through the undeniable power of redemption witnessed. The great hall, once a cavernous space echoing with the hollow clamor of court intrigues and the metallic clash of rival ambitions, now thrummed with a subdued energy as Thorn and Elara entered side by side. The pack assembled in awed silence, their forms a sea of furred shoulders and lowered heads, the air thick with the sense of hearthfires, polished armor, and the faint, underlying musk of deference. Elara's Pathfinder endowment, amplified by their union, unveiled the trajectory ahead with vivid clarity. Visions of a realm reconstructed upon the bedrock of empathy, where the scars of repudiation germinated concord and alliances bloomed from seeds of forgiveness rather than conquest. She spoke first, her voice steady and resonant, describing paths of peace, trade routes through the mountains safeguarded by mutual pacts, Omegas elevated as advisors rather than ornaments, her words weaving philosophy into practicality, challenging the pack's old hierarchies with gentle insistence. Thorn, standing at her side with the silver thread draped visibly between them like an oath incarnate, divested the oppressiveness of his coronet in a ceremonial act that symbolized his evolution. He removed the heavy iron band from his brow, its surface etched with runes of dominance now dulled by disuse, and placed it upon a central pedestal, apportioning governance with her sagacity in a declaration that rippled through the assembly. Decisions made in council, power shared as a tapestry rather than hoarded as a weapon. Their affinity served as corroboration of affection's restorative blaze, a living testament that dispelled lingering doubts among the pack. Whispers of the king's guilt transformed into murmurs of hope. Elara's once forsaken status reframed as the Diusa's chosen instrument. Beneath the plenilune that night, they ascended the ramparts together, the cold stone steps worn smooth by generations of footfalls, floccules of snow descending with delicate grace, like blessings from the heavens, the cosmos muted in reverence to their quiet vigil. The world below unfolded in panoramic splendor, valleys cloaked in white, distant forests whispering under the wind, and the moon's full orb hanging low, bathing everything in silver that made the bastion gleam like a jewel in the Diusa's crown. Her tears, formerly congealed in the isolation of ostracism and freezing into symbols of despair, now tempered his lesions with warmth, literal and metaphorical, as she traced the faded scars on his neck, her touch evoking memories not of pain, but of survival. His culpability, once an anathema that poisoned every choice, attained exoneration in her contemplation, his golden eyes meeting hers with a clarity unclouded by shadows, gratitude and love mingling in depths that words could scarcely capture. Resurgence transpired not in ostentatious victory or grand proclamations, but in serene election, a deliberate turning from creed supplanting despondency, where faith in the bond's fragility proved stronger than despair's allure, and amalgamation eclipsing the solitude that had defined them both. The silver thread, restored and resplendent in the moonlight, dangled betwixt them as they embraced, its glow syncing with their heartbeats, a physical manifestation of wounds healed and destinies intertwined. The boreal currents murmured approbation through the battlements, carrying ululations from the pack below that converged in symphonic accord, a chorus celebrating not just their return, but the rebirth of an entire legacy. Every alpha harbored a lesion carved by duty and choice. Every omega emerged, often from the ashes of rejection, to mend one with threads of compassion and quiet power. In their clasp atop the world, as snowflakes kissed their skin and the moon bore witness, the pyre of reclamation persisted undimmed, an eternal flame promising that even in the coldest exile, redemption could crown the fallen. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.